Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is Laura Smith on Blog Talk Radio, and this is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another Restoration, and really a show I just started doing, only done a couple of these shows, talking about the process of my healing journey and sort of where it started and what was the catalyst for it, and then we'll progress on through. But I appreciate everybody who's taken the time to listen to my shows, and I know there's still quite a few people listening to my shows, and after 3 years, that's awesome. So thank you very much, and it's a lot of work to keep up with all the shows that I do. I actually want to do more shows if I had time to do more shows. Lately, I just haven't had all that much time to do extra shows, but I still very much want to be a voice out here, and also, to help promote child abuse prevention information, as well as help for survivors. And I'm not a counselor or therapist. I have a certificate in counseling, but I don't have certification, so I don't claim to be a counselor or any kind of a therapist in any way. I'm just a survivor who have spent quite a lot of time in my healing journey and recording it here on Blog Talk Radio for people who may not have any or haven't sought any avenues to on their own to healing if they've been abused, and whether as a child or as an adult. And hopefully, after hearing a few survivors' stories, we'll actually realize that they're not alone, and that all of us, have to seek help, in some way, no matter what help it is, whatever help works for you, whatever type of help it is. And so I just want to be one more voice of encouragement, really, for people out here who are suffering and who are really having a hard time, because I know where I was before I started my healing journey, and that's a hard place to be. So that's why I continue to do these shows, and I appreciate everybody who's tuning in and catching these shows. Thank you very much. So we'll get started. I know last show I was just talking about what actually transpired there that caused my real healing journey to come about. I had started my healing journey in 2007, May 22nd, 2007, actually. And that was, I spent a couple of years doing some work on my heart, and mainly with God's Word. And that was that's really meant everything to me. And I didn't really look at the issues or anything like that. I wasn't looking at codependency or information so much or anything like that. I was mainly just working on my heart. And in that 2-year period, I was starting to feel pretty good. And then, like I was talking about my last show, my dad moved in with me from the States and just sent everything spiraling downward again. And I realized that I really needed to voice, first of all, what was happening and become vocal about it. So I started writing a blog, and I also started doing Blog Talk Radio shows, which I really felt it was kind of my way of saying that I need help, and I didn't want to go to a therapist or a counselor because I really don't trust people that much, and especially at that time I really didn't feel comfortable about that, because I don't want somebody getting a hold of my information and then using it against me. My parents were brought up on charges. 2 of my brothers killed themselves. The dysfunction in my family was well known, but I just didn't feel, I just really had a real trust barrier with people, especially people of authority who could then have control over me. So I didn't like that. So I just did my own self-help stuff, and I went and joined survivors on the internet, online, survivor groups who were set up for survivors who could go on anonymously if they wanted to and talk to people who have been through the same things, and that really helped me out a lot. So I started doing that as well as at the same time of writing my blogs. I was just doing that prior to writing my blog, and then decided to write the blog and tell people what was going on and what had happened. And in the meantime, my dad, who's quite elderly, was still here and driving me absolutely up the wall, because we had never developed any type of good relationship. We were not compatible in any way, shape, or form, and he was still very hurtful. And even in his old age, and I could say, oh, well, he's just an old man, but this stuff goes back so far that when he would say stuff about my mother especially, who is dead and in the grave, so many years ago, when he would say these horrible things that he always said about her the whole time I was growing up, and all the way through my youth, all the way through my young adulthood into my 30s and 40s. I had been talking to him on the phone after I left the States and moved to Canada. He was still running my mother into the ground and saying horrible things about her. And I was just heartbroken, because he's really the biggest reason why my mother did what she did to me and why our family just disintegrated, really. And I blame mainly my dad for all of this. And so he just was never going to change. I realized that. And as he was staying with me, and he had 1 year, I gave him 1 year. I said, you've got 1 year to find a place, and that's it. I'll dedicate 1 year to put you up in my place, but that's it. So at the end of 1 year, he did find a place, and he moved out. And when he moved out, I had been doing Blog Talk Radio for about, November to June, so about 7 months. I had already been doing Blog Talk Radio shows and writing my blog, which then turned into a book. So before he even moved out, I had the blog published as self-publishing as a book. And so, A Life of Death, Redemption. And he knew what I was doing. I actually showed him the book, and I told him, I said, you've never ever taken responsibility for any of this stuff, for your part of it. I'm not expecting him to take responsibility of the stuff that he didn't do, but I wanted him to take responsibility for what he did and for all the stuff that he did to my siblings and my mother and myself, and he would never do it. And so I showed him the book. I was like, I wrote a book about you and about Mom, and I'm sharing it with the world. I wasn't keeping it very a secret at all. My siblings really didn't say anything at all. The remaining siblings that are alive, one of them doesn't talk to me anyway, and the other one I actually cut off. I just cut my whole relationship off with my whole family. Really. After my dad moved out, I was like, that's it. I'm done. I'm not playing that role anymore. I'm not living in your psychotic codependency games that you play. I'm not doing it. I'm doing reality. If you guys can't do reality, then I can't hang out with you. And I cut them off and out of my life, right? Because they're not doing reality. They're not at all prepared to face the facts, the reality of what happened in our family and why it was destroyed. They don't want to see that, right? Because then that means they have to face their own demons, and they don't want to do that. So they have to do that on their own time and their own when they're ready, right? So I had to cut them off, and it wasn't hard to do because we're not close, so we weren't really there for each other anyway the whole time we were growing up. It's not like we ever developed that great of a relationship, any of my siblings and myself, or them between each other. Like none of us actually developed any kind of bond, really. It was only, excuse me, my voice is actually not really here this morning. There was only a couple of my siblings, two of my brothers actually, that were close. And my brother Rob and my brother Chess. And when my brother Chesley was murdered, it was way back in like 1972. I was 7 years old, and my other brother Rob, who really relied on Chesley for everything, was 1 year younger than him, and he was, he was a year older, sorry. So he was 20. So my brother was murdered at the age of 19. So they were close, but they were the only two siblings in the whole family that were actually close out of 7 children. The rest of us were too far apart in age and really too far apart in every other way. So we never developed any kind of relationship at all with each other. Not any healthy relationships at all. So for me to cut my family off is just, it wasn't really a big deal because we weren't really close anyway. And so, it wasn't hard to do. But it was at that point that I realized, this was like June 2010, let's say, July 2010, when I was doing my shows here on Blog Talk Radio, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, and the other shows that I was doing. I realized that I was starting to take back my own power, my own control, because for the 2 years that I was on my healing journey prior to my dad moving in, I really had no idea that these little things were lurking underneath the scenes in my own in my own situation with healing. So I didn't realize that this was going to be such a problem when my dad came to stay with me, which is my abuser, right? I didn't realize that these things would surface at that time. I really had no idea. I thought it was going to be a great time that I could get to know my dad and actually develop some type of a healthy relationship with him, and that was my hope anyway. And it didn't happen, and then all of a sudden all this stuff from my past actually started to really take hold in my life, and I was all of a sudden this little kid again, this wounded little kid that was really, my whole family was looking at playing this role of who I was when I was 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, even 20 years old. They had this scene and this role made up for me, and that's what role they decided that I should still be in, which is the old Lori, the Lori that's not healing, the Lori that takes all this abuse, the Lori that's no good, the Lori that their parents, which is my parents, treated so horribly. They wanted me to stay in that role, and I was like, no, I'm sorry, but I'm not playing that game anymore. I'm not going to play that role. I'm an adult woman with my own life. I've got my own life going. I don't need you, and I don't need to play your role and your games anymore. I started to read, which was really thankful for and grateful for. I picked up 2 books, John Bradshaw's books, and Healing the Shame That Binds You, and the other one, Homecoming. And those were really valuable, very valuable to me. I started reading through there and started looking online at information elsewhere about codependency and about role playing and these behaviors that dysfunctional families will take on and then expect you to play later, because they don't see you in any other light. They just see you as the person that they saw you so many years ago as. They're not looking at the fact that this person may already be doing quite well for themselves and an adult and doing quite good, right? They want you to continue to play that role that they saw you in so many years ago. And I think that as soon as I started to read that stuff and actually realize what was happening, I could see what my family was doing to me as an adult here now, 42 years old, 43 actually. No, actually, it's probably 44 by then. That's a few years back, 3 years ago. And, I could actually see what was happening, and I could see that exactly what they were doing was very dysfunctional, because they were not on their healing journey, and I was. And so I started to see, wow, they want me to continue to play this role. And my siblings never had any respect for me, but they don't respect anybody anyway. But even as an adult, that I got my life together and actually doing quite well as an adult, no respect for me in that regard at all. And I thought, well, who are you? In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, who are you to my 2 siblings to think that you can continue to treat me the way you did when I was a little kid? No, I don't think so. I had to, because my family doesn't have any boundaries. There's no boundaries, and there's no good, really any good relationships there, right? So I had to start putting up boundaries and saying, you know what, no, I don't deserve to be treated like that. I never did as a child, but I certainly don't as an adult, and I deserve to be treated with dignity, respect, and common decency. And if they couldn't do that, then they were out of my life. And they couldn't do it, so they were out of my life. So they're all gone, and I'm really happy. I don't care now if they live or die. I don't care. No, and that sounds harsh, but see, they don't care about me, right? And so why should I care about them when they don't care about me? They don't care if I live or die, or they didn't care about my brothers either. My brothers, nobody picked up my brother's ashes. My 2 brothers that killed themselves. Nobody cared about my brothers. Not even my other siblings, especially my other siblings. My parents didn't either, but my siblings were like, who cares? They were just loser drug addicts, And I was like, yeah, but they were loser drug addicts because of what our parents did to them. Are you guys not seeing the reality? We would talk. We would talk when I was younger, because we were still in contact with each other through, especially my 20s. Not so much in my 30s and into my 40s, because we were all far apart from each other and also very busy in our own lives. But in our 20s and stuff, we would talk, especially when my brothers had killed themselves. years, within 2 or 3 years later, we would talk about this stuff, and I'd be like, who caused them? Now nobody held them down and said, here, take these drugs. I mean, my parents weren't drug users. Really, they were prescription drug users, and my dad was always drinking NyQuil and stuff like that by the bottle, but they were not alcoholics and they were not drug addicts. They were psychologically screwed up, and so they needed to be on meds, but they weren't, and not on the proper meds. They were taking other meds, and they were diagnosed, but they weren't taking anything that they should have been taking. And nobody held my brothers down to force them to take drugs, but this was back in the 1960s, 1970s, the hippie era, the flower child era, and a lot of my older siblings got involved in drug use, except for my oldest sister. She was not like that, but the older brothers did, because it was that era, right? But my parents, if anybody could drive anybody to do drugs, it would be my parents, because they were insane. And so I don't blame my brothers for doing what they did. I blame my parents for doing what they did. And my brothers made the wrong choices. So there you go. My brothers made the wrong choices. So, and even in the choice of killing themselves, I mean, they made the wrong choices all the way around. But I blame the people who were ultimately responsible, because they didn't care about their children. They didn't care about their sons, and they didn't care about their children at all. And it was evident, and it was obvious. I mean, the abuse, the level of abuse that was going on, whether it be physical, verbal, emotional, psychological abuse, was intense. And for kids to grow up in that is really difficult. 2 of my siblings, like I said, had left and moved out when they were like 16, 17. They were gone. And the other remaining siblings were just under that age, so like 14, then like 12, 11, right down to me, which was, just a young baby, right? And, that there was no help. There was no hope. My parents were insane, and that's the way we lived our life. And people expect that kids are going to be able to grow in that, that a kid could even function in that is impossible. And so that's, for my siblings to sit there and not put the responsibility on who the responsibility laid on, which was my parents, it just bothers me. And I couldn't even, especially after I cut off my relationship completely with my dad, I was like, why should I continue to allow my siblings in my life when all they do is expect me to play that role that I played before, which was to take their garbage, to allow them to run me down, which would be verbal assaults, emotional abuse. They were very much involved in emotional abuse towards me as well. And I mean, everybody in my home was dysfunctional. It wasn't just my parents. The kids were not doing well, and so all the siblings were doing the same things my parents were doing, which was abusing each other. So it was absolutely ridiculous. And I'm like, no, I am on my healing journey. They're not, so I can't hang around with them. So what it did was give me some control, put the power back in my court, and all of a sudden the ball was back in my court. It's like, no, I choose who's allowed to be around me. I choose who's going to be in my life. I don't have to, just because there's some bloodline and blood tie, allow people to hurt me, No, I don't have to take that. And so by me doing that and cutting them off, it put the ball back in my court. So I started to realize that, I do have power and control over who I allow in my life. I do not have to allow people to hurt me or abuse me or to mistreat me in any way. That's my right to choose who comes into my life. And by setting those boundaries, it's very important. Boundary work is very important for people who have been abused, because we have to realize that, no, it's not okay what these people did to me. It's not okay that I didn't have any way to fight back. I didn't have any way to stop the abuse. I didn't have any way to get out of the abuse besides running away, which I had considered. I wouldn't have to run away. I could just leave the house. My parents wouldn't have come looking for me. I would just be gone, right? But, I mean, I thought about, leaving and being on the street and stuff, and I knew kids that were on the street, and I didn't want to go that way. I knew about dangerous people on the street, because I was always on the street and ran into some really crazy people. I was almost kidnapped like 5 times and just horrible things. So, I know that not only in people's homes are there crazy people, but there's insane people on the street, right? And when you're on the street quite a bit, you run into kids that are on the street, right? And I used to run into all kinds of kids who were on the street. And the dangers in their lives, it was absolutely horrific. So I didn't want to do that, and I thought, okay, if I blow the whistle and I get removed from my home and the other siblings get taken away, then I'm going to end up in foster care and I'm going to be mistreated because of my behavior, because I couldn't behave properly. I didn't even know how to behave properly, and I couldn't have somebody telling me what to do without forcing me to do it, which I would consider still the same kind of abuse. So the whole thing was really bad. Like, okay, this is what kids are facing today, and that's what bothers me. That's why I continue to speak out against child abuse, because it's so incredibly wrong. And there's so many people out there that think it's perfectly okay. And those people need to have some education and training to realize that, no, it's not okay. And no, it never was okay. And no, it will never be okay, right? Because there's so many wounded people out here now because of this garbage. And the world just looks down on these wounded people. See, people would look down on my brothers because they would see these punks, these drug addicts, long hair, no respect for authority, and just running around causing problems. And they would be like, look at those young punks. Why don't they just get off the street and clean themselves up? It's like, well, yeah, okay. Why don't you put yourself in their shoes for a few years and live through what they lived through, horrific beatings, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, day after day, night after night, have a little bit of sexual abuse thrown in there too, and then, we'll see how well you do. Okay, good. Now, there are survivors out there, I'm sure, who you would never know as a survivor because they are able to hide it. I was able to hide it. Nobody would know I was abused. If I didn't say anything to anybody, nobody would ever know that I was abused. They wouldn't know. Because I'm able to control everything I need to control for the day. If I need to go to work, I'm going to work. I'm fine. I can go to work, no problem. There are other people that are not in that same fortunate position that can't do that. And so, there's all different types of people out here, right? And people handle things differently. People have to, things will manifest a certain way. As a child growing up, I had to go to school the next day. So no matter what was going on the night before, whether I was being sexually abused, beaten on by my mother, threatened to be killed by my dad because he was going to kill the whole family, I still had to go to school the next day. So my mother would not let us stay home from school. And if I ditched school and got caught and got sent home, or got my parents called into school, then I'd be beaten. So I was like, okay, no, I'm going to school. I'm going to go sit there all day, and I'm just going to maintain. And that's what I did. And that's what we all did. I'm the ones that went to school. There was a few siblings that didn't go to school, but they eventually dropped out as older teenagers, but which would cause a lot of problems between my dad and them, because my dad was kicking them around all the time, telling them, you shouldn't be dropping out. And my mother would be like, they're dropping out. I'm letting them drop out. Blah, blah, blah. And then the fight would be on between my parents. And the whole thing was absolutely insane. But I went to school because I knew my mother would physically abuse me if I was caught doing anything like ditching school. Even my brother probably would have, a couple of my brothers, because there were a couple of times. One time our school was actually really close to our house. It was within about 4 blocks or maybe 5 blocks. We used to walk to school, and I actually had permission by the teacher to walk with my friend to her house, which was just a few blocks over, because she had to go home because she was sick, and I got permission to actually walk her home and walk with her and come right back. And my brother was actually walking down the street at the time and saw me and thought I was ditching and slapped me around and told my mother when I got home, and I got another beating when I got home. So this is my life, right? So next day I got to show up to school and I got to pull it together. So I can go to work, I can pull it together. There was insane situations. My sister's life was threatened by my brother one time, and I had to go to school the next day. I had to get back on that school bus and go back to school. And so I learned very quickly how to pull it together. And how to keep it together for the day, and after school I could collapse if I wanted to, or look for a whole bunch of drugs, which is what I was doing at the age of 12. Other than that, before the age of 12, I could just figure out another way to make it through after school. But that's just a whole other round of more abuse going home from school. So this was our life, and that's why I write what I do, and I speak about what I do, because I know that we weren't the only case out here. That there's so many kids out here who have been abused over the many millenniums of years and then now, even let's just say in our own, time period here, and then in the future. And I just think it's so absolutely wrong. And how do you wake people up to the fact that what they're doing to their children is hurting them when they think it's perfectly fine to do what they're doing to their children? It's just absolutely wrong. And that's why I continue to speak out against it. But by setting those boundaries and, deciding who I want and who I accept into my life really made a huge difference when I cut off my relationship with my dad that summer and with the rest of my family, and continued to work through my healing journey and just continued to move forward. It gave me some personal power, and I realized, what just happened, I mean, all the way through my 30s, I had been living on my own, doing quite well, and then, living with my husband, who's still with me. As our my adult life and relationship at this point, as far as outward appearances would go, things were going pretty good. I was just holding down jobs. I was able to maintain, not drinking, not using drugs, having somewhat of a good life, having some friends in my life, and still had issues that I needed to deal with from the child abuse. But I would still, like I said, I mean, at the age of 42, I was sitting on the couch just not thinking I could even go on any further, and that was just the pain in my heart. I just couldn't see how I could keep going that way. But other than that, I mean, by all appearances, it seemed like everything was going quite well. And so that whole catalyst of my dad coming to stay with me really is what started the whole thing off. And I started to realize, wow, I need to do so much work on boundaries. I need to do so much work on self-affirmations, which people might think is really silly, but it's not. Not when you've come from being so beaten down and battered down by a lot of verbal abuse, a lot of psychological abuse, people making you uncomfortable, making you feel that you are those things that they said, and that you are whatever they said you are, and that you start to believe it, like maybe I am, and I still have some of these things that I have to work through, I don't know if they'll ever go away, right? I mean, some of these things that I work through, if I do something wrong, or if I make a mistake, or if I mess something up, I mean, I hear all of a sudden in the back of my mind, I've got these old voices telling me, oh, you're worthless, you're stupid, you're no good, you're never going to make it, you're just useless, you're this, you're that, and I got to work through that stuff again then, right? Because this stuff it's just ingrained in my mind from the way that it made me feel as a child and as a teen and as a young adult, listening to this stuff from not only my abuser parents but my siblings, and then having to try to deal with the fact that, no, I'm a person, I have rights, and I can stand up for myself, I don't have to take on that garbage. I don't have to take that. That was all wrong, first of all. They were incorrect. That information was incorrect, and it was wrong. And they fed me a bunch of lies about myself, right? So I had to start learning really quickly, whoa, no. I'm not dumb, I'm not stupid, I'm not worthless, and I do deserve to be here. I do deserve to have a good life. I'm not just a worthless rape child. I'm not just this really bad, evil thing, which my parents and my siblings all tried to make me feel, and I did a great job of it. So, yeah, this is where I started to do the work, is right about that summer when after my dad found his own place and I had cut everybody off. I really got busy, and especially with the help of John Bradshaw's book and Bernie's books, really helped me out a lot. So we'll just pick up here when we come back again next week, Lord willing. And if you're having a hard time and struggling, I just I cannot say it enough. I really hope that you will reach out and get some help, because it's really important. We deserve to find help and good help, and you have to really become almost your own best advocate if you can, because you know what you need, right? And you know what would be good for you as far as a healing journey goes, and as far as help, to get you started and help someone to support you through it. And so, I just want to encourage people to keep going and never give up, right? That's my big message. And we'll talk to you all soon. God bless you. Bye-bye.